Welcome to our presentation on the poem What Were They Like? This is an analysis by Mike Bespalov and Ganesh Bhavanasi. The title of this poem is What Were They Like? This poem was written by the author Denise Levertov. The main themes of his poem consist of the Vietnam War and the injustice of that very war. This was a poem written in 1966, which was at the height of the Vietnam War. Summary. In an unusually structured poem, Denise Levertov forces the readers to imagine the drastic effects war has on the population and the culture of a country. The poem is specifically and explicitly directed towards the Vietnam War, which started in 1955 and ended in 1975. She presents a critical view of the way a nation and its culture could be disregarded for the sake of a pointless war. This is done very subtly through the structure and language of the poem. It is written in the format of two contrasting speakers, someone who asks questions while the other answers them. The questioner asks innocent questions, which reflect quite an idealized view of the world, but also an ignorance about other countries. Perhaps this is meant to be a student or a reporter. The responder uses powerful imagery to contrast with these innocent ideas. Their message is that everything is now destroyed due to the war that has happened unfairly. This is clear sarcasm to expose the ignorance of the questioner, as well as sadness and anger because of the consequences. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War took place at a time of great social change in the Western world. The developing social and cultural freedoms of the 1960s resulted in an increased questioning of the accepted authority. A whole new counterculture sprang up which valued political, racial, and sexual equality. Famous figures of the 1960s, such as Martin Luther King and John Lennon, could often be heard speaking out against injustice. A main focus of the counterculture movement was protesting against American involvement in the affairs of Vietnam and other countries in Southeast Asia. A key tool used to do this was the protest song. Artists such as Bob Dylan, John Baez, and Peter Seeger produced simple but heartfelt pieces of music, criticizing the Vietnam War and what they saw as the Western world meddling where they had no right. It is in this context that Denise Levertov writes her poem, What Were They Like? Although not as openly critical as many of the protest songs, Levertov uses the power of the question and response format to expose the wrongdoing and the crimes against humanity which so appalled her. Effect on the readers. Due to its publishment in such a dramatic and violent time period, the effects that the readers feel and express will be both dramatic and extravagant. Some may like the poem and its promoting ideology of peace and the questioning of unnecessary American interference, whereas others may feel a distaste and hatred towards the poem's downplay of the situation and its questioning of America. Through its subtlety and questioning, it would sure have caused quite a ripple in America. Themes. Ignorance of other cultures. A prominent theme in this poem is how we are ignorant of other countries which have different cultures to ours. The questioner in the poem in particular asks questions which show a lack of understanding about Vietnam. For instance, they ask if they had an epic poem which links to the Odyssey in ancient Greece. This shows they regard Vietnam as an ancient civilization. They also ask whether they held ceremonies to reverence the opening of buds, which suggests they regard Vietnam as a primitive and backward country which relies heavily on nature. This can be said to dehumanize the Vietnamese, as if their countries are so different to our own. We may not be able to feel as much as sympathy for them. To summarize, by doing this, the questioner is distancing themselves from the war, and also perhaps justifying their country in this way. There are also questions asked without sensitivity, unaware that all culture has been destroyed by the war against the USA. After so much death, no country would be inclined to quiet laughter. War. The second, equally as important theme is war. The poet explores the effects of war on a nation and its people and creates an effect of terror and pathos towards the Vietnamese. We are vividly told about when bombs smash those mirrors. This imagery incorporates sound through Smash Those Mirrors, making it powerful while it talks about the harsh realities of war. This is all the more emphasized through the sounds of people dying as there was only time to scream. All of this is used to target the reader's pathos. These images strike the reader's emotions very heavily and harshly, forcing them to imagine if they were in such a situation, how they would react, and what they would do. The poem goes on to talk about innocence, of those who were killed and how they were ill prepared to defend themselves, reflecting negatively on the country who attacked them, the United States. Once again, imagery is used, but this time to create naivety, such as how they gain pleasure from the simplest acts of gathering once to delight in blossom, telling the purity and peacefulness of their minds. At the start of the poem, the form is question and answer, talking about how ill-prepared the Vietnamese were, questioning that, did the people of Vietnam use lanterns of stone? This form creates an indirect dialogue between the reader and the author. The author is questioning the reader's view of Vietnam and making them imagine how undeveloped the country was. It plays on the reader's ethos. Is it fair that America went armed with bombs, chemical weapons, and guns, when the Vietnamese did not even retaliate with lanterns of stone? This links back to the context of social development and the rise of equality during this period of time. It asks, where was the equality in the war? Is such an unbalanced war ethical? Is it a crime? The poem ends by communicating how a country once so vibrant with quiet laughter and ceremonies has now been reduced to the culture being reported and being not remembered. This blend of imagery, exaggeration, and subtle innuendos gives rise to remorse and sadness from the readers. This effect of loss of lives, cultures, and families that the reader imagines and feels may go on to turn sadness into anger and action such as protests and stopping of such a war, which is the reason and purpose of this poem being written, to stop the Vietnam War. Tone and mood. Anger. Although this is less of an obvious mood here, anger is thinly veiled throughout the poem. For instance, the questions are often responded with quite harsh answers, which are brutal and not gentle in the slightest. This shows the responder to the questions is not patient with the questioner and regards them with contempt for asking these questions without sensitivity. This emotion of anger is conveyed by war being brought into every answer. The questions are intending to avoid the war and focus on the people, but the answers always bring war into it to show how much of an effect war has had on the people, as well as to express anger at the questions. For example, a seemingly innocent question of had they an epic is turned into the words scream and bombs smashed into mirrors, which also shows bad luck. This shows Levertov is desperate to show how you cannot mention the people of Vietnam without mentioning the war, as war had such an effect on them. Irony. Irony is used in this poem to attack the actions of America against Vietnam. For instance, the questioner asks if the people of Vietnam used lanterns of stone, with their response being, "Sir, their light hearts turned to stone." The adjective light implies an innocence, but it is now stone, which shows that they are no longer feeling emotion as they are dead. These two combined sentences have the same topic matter, but the second is the subversion of the first to show the stupidity of the question. This is a brutal statement which is designed to show how stupid the question asked was. America killed civilians, and now they ask what they were like after having destroyed their culture. The address sir is also highly ironic. This can be read as someone addressing someone they are meant to respect, but actually do not. They ridicule them for their ignorant questions, but this is subtle, as it is masked by false respect. The same is done with the statement, "Sir, laughter is bitter to the burnt mouth." The short sentence suggests that the question, whether inclined to quiet laughter, has been dismissed, with plosives being used in bitter and burnt to highlight the brutal actions that have happened, contrasting with the word laughter to show the ignorance of the questioner.
This poem carries a profound sense of loss, the loss of life, the loss of culture. The line of fathers told their sons old tales creates a warmth and shows family bonds well. In contrast, when the bombs dropped, there was only time to scream. This shows that America destroyed positive emotions and left nothing but destruction behind. Also, the poem mentioned the children being killed in a very matter-of-fact nature, showing the tone of the war. Finally, it is stated there were no more buds after the children were killed. Buds represent hope, and by killing the children, it is stated that there is no more hope for Vietnam. It is not just individuals who suffered, but the entire country. On the cultural side, it is stated repeatedly throughout the poem that it is not remembered, showing that what has happened in Vietnam before the war is now a mystery to us. It has been destroyed along with the people by the Americans. The quote, "a dream ago perhaps," is powerful as the word dream shows how far away normality seems to be from the moment the war began. Perhaps also shows that nobody knows, creating a sense of pity for the culture that was lost. Finally, the statement on which the poem ends on is most poignant. Who knows? It is silent now. This shows how culture was destroyed mindlessly and without any regard. Nobody knows about the culture because nobody cared. The noun silence shows how there is no life left. Everything has been torn apart by war. This creates a powerful image for a reader. They can picture the image clearly, showing the sense of loss. Pity. The poem's first stanza is organised as a question and answer poem. It is full of rhetorical questions that gets the readers to imagine the peace and serenity that existed in Vietnam before war ravaged. Those questions are not posed to receive any answers, but to bring out empathy towards Vietnam. Questions such as, did they hold ceremonies to reverence the opening of buds are used to set and establish the mood of the poem. The fact that this poem is centered around the disrupted and shattered peace, culture and families of Vietnam. Furthermore, the technical usage of listing when presenting these questions makes a more powerful stanza than that to the reader's lists the variety of questions that were never posed or considered before entering a foreign war. All of this is used to create and make the readers feel an unbearable amount of sadness towards the Vietnamese, leading to them feeling pity. Along the next stanza, between lines 10 to 20, Levertov utilises repetition to create a sense of power that the readers have, but do not acknowledge. She repeats the noun sir, followed by a caesura. The noun sir is a dominant noun and associated to those of respect and power. By cleverly addressing the readers with such an influential term, it empowers them, telling them that they do have the power, the respect and the voice to change what is happening in Vietnam. It is telling them to collect all the pity they have felt in the first stanza and into a response, an action, an objection to the horrors that are unfolding in Vietnam, and by defying their own country doing so. Also throughout the poem, pity is created through vivid descriptions of destruction. For example, Levertov states that the bones were charred, a gruesome image which leads the reader to feel pity for the peasants. They also did not sing like the flight of moths in moonlight, an image that resonates the idea of peace, but instead only have time to scream. This shows how the war subverted their peaceful lifestyles. Finally, Levertov emphasizes how defenseless they were, stating their lives were in rice and bamboo, and fathers told their sons tales, showing people who are defenseless and peaceful, with this adjective ironically repeated in peaceful clouds reflected in the paddies, showing how different war was to their normal lives. This makes the reader feel sorry for them, as their real lives are very different to the war. The poem is written in quite an individual and simple manner, without sticking to any literary conventions. Lines are of varying length and there is a lack of rhyme. A key bit of the structure is the question and answer style previously mentioned. In this, the questioner asks ignorant questions such as, were they inclined to quiet laughter, with the responder answering in a manner that is either brief, dismissing the question, or educating, as shown by the words, remember, most were peasants. The first stanza, consisting of 9 lines, is just questions to be answered in the second stanza. The second stanza contains 21 lines and is more descriptive in nature, as well as more elaborated. It contains longer explanations and offers vivid language, such as "it is not remembered," and "it is silent now," which give the reader emotion. The structure will make the reader more engaged, as they will see something resembling a debate, meaning they will see more than one viewpoint about the Vietnam War. The two people speaking this are very different. One is ignorant about what happened in Vietnam, perhaps resembling the reader and enabling the reader to feel ashamed of their ignorance and lack of sensitivity about it. The answers to the questions the readers may themselves have asked also make them think more deeply about the Vietnam War, while actually getting a sense of what happened and what huge amounts of loss there were, which they may not have comprehended. The vocabulary of the first stanza is relatively straightforward and simple, making it accessible to the average reader. All the questions asked of the readers are presented in past tense, suggesting that Vietnamese culture no longer exists, creating a sadness for the reader. By contrast, the second section makes use of metaphors. Their light hearts turned to stone. A comparison, in this their singing resembled the flight of moths in moonlight. Contrast, the bones used for making jewellery and the charred bones of people. Alliteration, moths in moonlight, and other literary devices. This makes the responder appear more considered and cultured, making their viewpoint more dominant, showing that these are views about the war we're meant to have, according to Levertov. It also allows the beauty of the country and its cultures to be expressed, making the reader appreciate how beautiful they were, especially now they are gone. The answers are in a mixed response of past and present, which highlights the sense of confusion caused by the war. Vietnam remembers its past, but can no longer rely on it, and must change. The final statement, "it is silent now," is a powerful statement which is firmly in the present and highlights not only the war ending, but also what is happening, the cultural silence which has followed as a result. It also precedes an actual silence as the poem ends and the reader is left to consider their personal reaction. Effect on the reader. The language used is designed to make the reader feel emotion, chiefly pity, by not hiding from what happened in the war. The positive language overarched by the negative language is what is most impacting on the reader. For instance, gardens illumined pleasant ways makes the reader think of a peaceful, pleasant garden, which is the very epitome of calm. However, later it is stated that the children were killed, instantly making the reader feel sad that the previously illustrated paradise of Vietnam was gone, and the most innocent of them too. This makes the reader agree with Levertov's opinions about the Vietnam War, that it was an unfair conflict which never should have happened. Rhythm. Levertov writes in free verse, which indicates at first glance that there is no sustained rhythm or meter throughout the poem. However, Levertov uses poetic techniques such as enjambement and caesuras to control the flow of the poem. The poem has free verse, which also makes it more like human speech, making it a direct address to the reader. Effect on the reader. The poem having free verse makes it more of a direct address to the reader. There are two distinct voices which speak normally, without being constrained by rhyme or rhythm. This makes the poem feel more real and structured to the reader, making them closer to understanding the war. As it is still a poem, it cannot be as grammatical and have more of a flow than prose, making it more emotionally moving while retaining the lack of constraints in prose. It is worth noting that free verse is often used to create a poem that links together and feels more natural, and is more about persuading the reader than describing things, which is the reason why Levertov chooses to use it, to get her points of view about the Vietnam War across in a logical way. So, how does this poem link to the theme of conflict? The poem links to the theme of conflict as it is about an ongoing war between Vietnam and the USA, and shows how disastrous conflict is towards the innocent. It is also about the conflict of cultures between the West and the East. This is not just about the Vietnam War, it also links to the Cold War, as well as tensions with America and Libya and North Korea. Throughout history, Levertov argues, we have been dismissive towards other cultures and regard our own as superior. Here, she speaks as an American from her point of view. Solution to the conflict. This poem in a way provides solution to a conflict, but it is not the sort of happy solution that may be expected. The conflict, as in the Vietnam War, is over, but that is only because nobody remains to continue it. However, perhaps the biggest conflict still remains. It is a conflict of the collision between Western cultures and those that are more traditional as a result of a lack of understanding and or pity. Levertov is attempting to stop conflicts like these from happening by giving others a greater awareness of other countries. In our opinion, this was a very moving poem, which brought the harsh effects of war on innocent civilians in a very emotional way as a result of the brutal imagery used by Levertov. Thank you for listening.